Everybody just stay put, okay? Just stay inside the store.
I can't stay here. I gotta get home to my kids.
No, don't go out there. It's death out there. It's the end of days.
Stop it, okay? Stop it.
Please, everybody just relax, okay?
He's right. Let's just stay cool. Let's just try to figure out what happened.
I'm sorry. I can't just stay here. I have to get home to my kids.
Ma'am, no, you can't go out there.
Could be a poisonous gas cloud.
Can you hear that man screaming?
I agree. Let's stay here until we figure it out.
You're not listening. I can't stay here. Wanda's looking after little Victor. She's only 8. Sometimes she forgets she's supposed to be watching him, you know? Oh, is anybody gonna help me? Won't somebody here see a lady home?
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is The Fear of God. Check. Is this mic on? Okay. All right, everybody. We're here. Day 4. After the fog rolled over the hills. Been trapped in this store for a while now. I've been trying to get some transmissions out to you. So, yeah, we still have plenty of food. Even though some bad things have happened to some of us. We are here trying our best to make our way through the fog, exploring faith and fear, getting to what heals us somehow through, getting to healing through horror, as it were. And with you right now is one Mr. Reed Lackey. I've been coming to you, as you know, the past little while. I've had with me my dear friend and compatriot, Mr. Nathan Rouse. But to be honest with you, he joined that group to go out to the pharmacy, and ever since he came back, he has not quite been the same. He's just been walking around. Well, first of all, he just completely screams at the drop of a hat. You just, a stiff breeze comes by, and he's completely beside himself. He's been talking about all of these apocalyptic devastations, and he's been doing all sorts of just fire and brimstone navigation. He has just completely gone off the deep end. I'm not even quite sure exactly what we're gonna do from this point on. I mean, we do still, if you're out there, if you're listening, if you are able to hear this, then there's all kinds of survival things you could do. But what I want you to do is to go to iTunes, and I want you to leave a rating or a review about this show. You could call the authorities, but really, the point is, I want you to leave a rating. I want you to take the time to leave a review. Don't call for help. Don't call the store. Don't do anything else until you've left. Oh, Nathan, hey buddy.
Hey, buddy.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm here. Listen, so life has been kind of crazy lately, and I wasn't sure. Yeah, I did pick you up some, what you needed from the pharmacy. I won't tell everybody about that, but
no, I appreciate that.
No, it's good. Your secret's safe with me. But while I was there, because life has been, there's a lot going on, but I did finish finally, I was able to finish the movie that we were working on today. You had given me the heads up. It was that.
Oh, yes.
I was able to work it out to get it watched in time for our conversation. The one with, let me look up her name real quick. the Adrian Barbeau movie. It's directed by John Carpenter. That's what we're talking about. I mean, I knew we did it a while back, but what? I mean, I knew we've talked about formats where we kind of revisit, material before. So I just figured maybe that was what you were intending, right?
Are you under the impression that the 1980 film starring Adrian Barbeau and Jamie Lee Curtis, directed by John Carpenter, is actually The Mist? Because it's not. That's The Fog.
Well, okay. Well, we
covered it. It was like
thankful.
our 6th episode.
I know. Okay, well, I was prepared for this probability because you love to just like curveball me here sometimes. But like, I knew you'd do something like that, so I also covered my bases. Believe it or not, I did watch it. The real one.
Great.
Because I
okay.
knew
All right.
I was like, it's weird to me that we're rewatching the John Carpenter movie. Like I don't.
Sure.
It didn't make sense, but sometimes you're just really wrong about things. So I figured maybe that's what was happening.
I love John Carpenter too.
So right. But like, so I did watch the real one. It is, just everybody. We are today talking about the story of Diane Fossey. It is starring Sigourney Weaver.
No, wait.
Also,
wait. Are you talking? Did you then, to cover your bases, did you then watch Gorillas in the Mist? Is that what you what you then watched? Gorillas in the Mist. Did you then? What about Gorillas in the Mist stood out to you? Be like, wow, this is a real pivot away from from the fear of God.
We've done more subtle horror before. Subtle kind of. I mean, I think it'd be pretty scary to go just hang with some gorillas in the mist. I can't see them. They can't.
They
see me.
cuddle with her. Like that's
well, I didn't know that going into it. Like it's one of those like it's one of those like safe horror movies. It's like it's the kind of horror movie you show your parents or whatever. You watch with your parents. It's like, well, nobody. They're like, do they get rent limb from limb? Like, well, it's not those kind of gorillas.
No, yeah. It's like, I mean.
Nice
I could see a case for King Kong, but not Gorillas in the Mist. Like that's not no. Nathan.
What?
I sincerely hope that you've further covered your bases and watched the 1970s Clint Eastwood directorial debut Play Misty for Me, because that is what we
No. I missed that one. Why don't we just type this stuff out for me, man? There's
because
too many movies.
No, it's because that's man. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we do something perhaps on the fly? We're completely unprepared. Do you remember So do you remember it was about maybe 10 to 12 years ago? There was a film about a bunch of people they get trapped in a grocery store because this big cloud sort of rolls in. It was directed by the guy who directed The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile. It's called The Mist.
There's a bunch of people in that, and one of which is Thad Jane, right?
Yeah, Tad Jane's in it. Yes, that's exactly right.
It's Thad Jane. Tad is the other brother.
They're triplets now. They're triplets.
They're like the two Baldwins.
But
they all like each other.
they're like those Baldwins. There are Baldwins.
There's actually, believe it or
in...
not, there's actually a fourth sibling in the Jane family. It's the girl, and you'll never believe what her name is.
Thomasina?
Jane.
It's Jane.
Wow, what a beautiful piece of just organic live improvisational radio theater. That was amazing. That we got to the punch, that we did not even plan to get to the punchline of Jane. That is amazing.
We did not pre-brief that in the slightest.
I'm so proud of us right now. Holy cow. Whoa. That's all I gotta say.
Hey, buddy.
Hey.
So
wow, that was fun.
I enjoyed that immensely. Hopefully our listeners did too. So listeners, listen, we know what we're here to see. All right. We're here to see The Mist. 2007.
I was hoping you had another one up your sleeve.
No, there's only so many, okay?
I know. I tried. Trust me.
But I mean, we could do...
no, just go forward.
So yes, we are covering. This is Nathan.
What?
Nathan?
What?
Do you realize that this is not only a continuation of a series that we've started at the top of the year, but it is the start of a sort of a mini burst, if you will, a mini sort of a flurry of
Shazam!
of entries in this series, and that is we are tagging back in with our year-long series exploring, because we already have the Quarterly Kings. Last week, if all went according to plan, because time warp, we're recording this a little early, but last week, if all things went according to plan, we had our Quarterly King 5 with all of our friends, and they came back. The Losers Club, Flags Vegas, the Pet Seminarians were all there as we discussed Pet Cemetery. Wasn't that fun? Wasn't that a good time?
Turns out a man's heart is stonier.
Yeah, it was so great. Anyway, so last week we had Quarterly King number 5, and then this week we are not only tagging back in with hashtag 19, our year-long series, but we're going to do a few of these in a row. So we haven't fully decided exactly what each of the entries are going to be. We've got some great candidates, but we're gonna spend a little bit of time for the next few weeks with old King, with good old Stephen King, which always tremendously excites me. But yes, we are diving into it was a novella that he wrote, and we'll get into all of the particulars of this piece and the film and the written work and all of that good stuff.
Slow down, buddy. Slow down. You know, we are revisiting 19. We're gonna do that for a little run here because that is the umbrella. But before, you're just like just slow it down, man.
I was diving in. I was like a tentacle. I just reached out and grab you. I was just like, yeah.
Whoa! Don't. Please, no tentacles. That tentacle pops out and it's just like, what you watching? What you reading? What you listening? I'm gonna bite your arm off.
Listeners don't know that in order to get into the spirit, what you did, you had a little hand. A little hand puppet.
Goodness.
Little hand puppet tentacle. Just sort
I'm still hung up on Jane. That's comedy. That is comedy. Oh, golly.
Oh, my goodness. Oh,
I got
beautiful.
two. I got
all right.
Those.
I got one.
Okay. Last week I mentioned seeing Shazam, and I did have on the front end of that, and I haven't referenced this before, but I had like an extended trailer. I'm actually trying to move forward and successfully here, but an extended trailer, dude, for the new Godzilla movie.
Oh, I haven't even seen one trailer
for
that. Haven't watched even one,
bro,
for it. Yeah.
I don't have like some sort of. I am not like the target audience for Godzilla historically. Like I don't have any attachment to that IP. I did see the was it Gareth Edwards?
Gareth Edwards, yeah.
Gareth Edwards. Evans did the Apostle.
Yes.
So Gareth Edwards, Godzilla film from, 4 or 5 years ago. I don't think I was not prepped to talk about this. It just occurred to me that it's worth talking about. But you need to go watch a trailer for this. But I got to see on the front end of Shazam, they did this extended trailer. Man, the visuals for this are amazing.
I can imagine.
It is amazing. And it's called King of the Monsters. So like all of these, Titans, I think is what they call them.
Yeah.
In this mythology.
Kaiju.
That's no.
They're called Kaiju.
No. That's the Del Toro thing.
Are you talking about Clash of the Titans? What are you
No.
A Del Toro thing. What are you
Kaiju are in Pacific Rim, which is a Guillermo del Toro film, at least originally.
The original Kaiju is Godzilla.
Right. I know. But like in the movie, I don't think they call them Kaiju. I thought you were making a Pacific Rim reference, okay? Just go with it. Just King of the Monsters.
King of the Monsters.
King of the Kaiju.
I'm just saying,
whatever. Okay. Anyway, in this extended trailer, man, they had the like three-headed dragon creature.
Oh,
can you see? I'm making three. I'm holding up 3 fingers.
I see those 3 fingers. Yes,
like Hail Hydra.
You're like wiggling them.
It looks amazing.
Please stop.
11 from Stranger Things is in it. Vera Farmiga is in it from Bates Motel and various.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, Kyle
That's
Chandler from Friday Night Lights, It's weird
Oh my
when he
gosh.
says "clear eyes, full hearts can't lose." It's kind of weird when he says that to Godzilla, but he goes and gets in it.
That's it. That's your trailer moment.
He
right
goes
there.
back.
What was really weird is when Godzilla said it. Then I was like, oh, man.
Right. It was really loud. It was kind of hard to. He struggles with the script.
No, I'm not even.
No. Don't do it. Just do your thing.
Okay, so I don't know if you've seen this film or if you had any interest in this film. I know, I'm pretty sure you have a general, affection and affinity for the work of the Coen brothers. Have you seen the film that they debuted on Netflix, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs?
I did not.
I'd watched it in its initial release when it came out around Thanksgiving. But then I had the opportunity, and I'm not quite sure when it will be airing in relationship to when this will air, but I had the opportunity and privilege to be a guest on the Real World Theology podcast discussing The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. And if you have not seen it, it's the only one that I'm aware of. It's an anthology Western. So
Right.
It is, 6 separated out stories. And Nathan, they are outstanding. I mean, I absolutely adore No Country for Old Men. I think No Country for Old Men is a wonderful and powerful and very affecting film. I think Fargo is outstanding. But, and I'm not sure how many viewers of this film agree with me on this, but I think Ballad of Buster Scruggs is a strong contender maybe for my personal favorite Coen Brothers film. It is absolutely wonderful.
Did you mention Oh Brother?
Oh, see, and I'm very fond of Oh Brother, but Oh Brother would kind of barely skirt under like a top 5 for me with the Coens.
Really?
I do have a lot of affection for it, but
Well,
no,
then stay out of the Woolworth.
I'm a Dapper Dan man. So, but no, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is absolutely wonderful. Again, 6, thematically connected but still somewhat compartmentalized stories, and again, it's available on Netflix. I don't want to say too much about it because with 6 separate stories, it's like where do you begin and where do you pivot? It's full of humor. It's full of
We could be here all night.
Possibly. I mean, it's full of some grotesque sort of dark comedy. It's also got some powerful observations about just our approaches to the stories of our lives and what we want them to be and what they ultimately are and what we can and cannot control about them. And it's outstanding. If you're at all a fan of Westerns, you should check it out. If you're at all a fan of the Coen brothers, you should check it out. If you are at all a fan of just good cinema, please check out The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I had seen it back in Thanksgiving, never mentioned it on the pod, but rewatching it recently made me remember again just how much I adore it and love it, and so I want everybody to see it. It's great.
Well, thank you for that share.
You're welcome, Sonny.
Wow. Nothing gets past this guy. This wasn't what I was going to share, but you mentioning you were on Real World Theology. So, Reed, I think I don't know if I told you this or not, but I got to visit our More Than One Lesson faculty member John Vinolas over on Two Gig Soup. Yeah,
you did tell me that.
Like, bro, I just got to talk about my love for Daredevil for like an hour. I'm worried that John regrets having me on because of my enthusiasm and inability to let him talk on his own show. Because there's so few things in this world that you could be like, hey, talk about this. And I would just run off at the mouth, excitedly for an hour. But Daredevil is one of those things.
Few. I'm just kidding.
I mean,
just ripping you.
That's such a, no. You are correct a little bit there, but that is so triangulating on so many,
sure.
fandom geekeries of mine. So yes,
the fan geeks.
So plugging John over at Two Geek Soup. Particularly, I believe it's the most recent episode I did guest on there. He mentions you in the show notes, basically saying, Nathan, Reed, where did you find this Yahoo is essentially what it says.
Understood.
But
Understood. Yes.
That's not what I was going to share. What I was going to share is, have you watched Killing Eve?
No, I've seen quite a few promos for it, and it hasn't hit my radar as something that I would specifically be very drawn to, but admittedly I haven't looked very deep into it.
Well, I think the first, so that this episode will air, our Fear of God episode will air a couple of weeks after season 2 of it begins. Season 1, I think, is only like 6 episodes, maybe 8. In my ongoing search for, TV shows and stuff, my wife and I can watch together. She's even to this day, a Grey's Anatomy fan and loves Sandra Oh. So I was like, hey, Sandra Oh won the Golden Globe or the Emmy. I can't remember, but I'm almost definite she won the Golden Globe. But she got a lot of accolades for her performance in Killing Eve. I would recommend it. Like it is a really good kind of just British crime thriller. Like Sandra Oh is not playing; she's playing an American as part of this British kind of police detail. Well, yeah. But she is the Eve of the title. Well, I do want to sing the praises of an actor named Jodie Comer. I believe it's Comer. I presume it's Comer, but if she's actually British, it may be pronounced differently. But she plays the sort of villain counterpart, kind of the Joker to Sandra Oh's Batman, if you will. Batwoman, if you will. And dude, the show is worth watching just for her performance. Sandra Oh's great, but she's playing more the kind of straight character, just kind of the foil.
Sure. Yeah.
Jodie Comer, this actor who plays the character's name is Villanelle, and she's just the the kind of the villain, if you will. And she's amazing. She is amazing. She's young, but she's talented and steals every scene she's in.
Wow.
The show is, and it is a good, just kind of crime thriller. So you might enjoy it from that perspective. And there's not too high of a buy-in in terms of the, quantity. So anyway, gotcha. Killing Eve is great. The first season is already available. Season 2 begins in April. And, that's been another episode of What You Watching? What you reading? What you listening to? Uh-huh.
This is my attempt at my little hand puppet there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Whoa.
So Nathan.
Yep.
Woo.
Do you ever wonder if listeners are like, man, they're really good at repetition of their humor, but do you think they pick up on the fact that those humorous repetitions are in episode couplets and that they're like, it hadn't occurred to me they record these 2 at a time, and thus it makes sense that
don't tell them behind the secret.
Don't look at the man behind the curtain.
I'm sure we astute listeners probably know by now, oh, this was the second one in a given night. I'm
right.
sure they've probably at least
Nathan's really punchy now. It must be the second one.
Wow.
Reed's really having a hard time reining him in.
But no, I don't know how to segue out of that. So segue.
That's all right.
So
you did a terrible job on that.
Wow. let me try this segue. Shazam! Now here we are.
Okay.
So we are diving into #19, the launch of a flurry of 3 or 4 episodes here, exploring somewhat. When I call them lesser works of Stephen King, it's just the Quarterly Kings are kind of the big iconic landmarks in his career. At least thus far they have been, and these smaller pieces that we still think merit coverage, but maybe not necessarily the extension of a coverage for a Quarterly King. So this is one of 3. It's actually one of 4 films written by Stephen King, based on Stephen King work. Adapted and directed by Frank Darabont. So the biggest one.
Correct me. You didn't just say that King wrote the film, did you?
He didn't write the screenplay. Frank Darabont.
Right.
Yeah, Frank Darabont adapted the screenplay, but the original work was Stephen King. So those 4 pieces, most people will know the 3 of them, but they may not remember or know about the 4th one. So Stephen King has this thing that he still does. It still exists. It is an active thing he does on a regular basis, and it is why he has an explosion of credits on IMDb. It is long known among his fans. He has what he calls the Dollar Babies. Have you heard of the Dollar Babies? You know the Dollar Babies.
I have.
All right. So the Dollar Babies, for those who may not know, are basically...
it's Makushla, right? the boxing movie? There's it's like he has. I mean, you mentioned
Makushla?
Explosion. He's got like 1 million of them.
Yes, I mean there's
$1 million.
there. Yes, I get it. I get it.
Makushla.
I have no idea what.
Then why'd you get lost there?
That's
what they call her in the movie, Makushla.
Makushla? It's been so long since I saw that movie.
Yeah.
Don't make obscure references to me. No, I'm
she
just
dies
kidding.
in the end.
Woo! that's the spoiler alert. That's like you just caught a spoiler back there. I'm just letting you know. There's a spoiler back there for that movie. It's like you're approaching that speed bump, but the sign for it is like 20 feet after you hit the speed bump. You bump over it. The undercarriage of your car is just completely obliterated, and now it's like, oh yeah, you just hit a bump. By the way,
that's the worst.
But anyway, no, Dollar Babies. Aspiring filmmakers. Stephen King allows them, even as popular and as prominent as he is, if you like the A-Team, if you can get a hold of him, if you can go through the sort of the specific channels, if one of his short stories specifically applies to shorter works, if a short story of his is not currently under license for a larger project, then he will license the rights to adapt that material for just $1. And the only requirement is the filmmakers who make it may not distribute the film for profit, and he has to receive a copy of the finished film. That's his only requirement. It's just an opportunity to, in full legality, make and adapt a Stephen King work. Obviously, they know going into it that they will not be able to glean any money from it, but it gives them the opportunity to fully and legally adapt a work of their favorite author, and I love the fact that he does that. He has been doing that for decades, for absolute decades, and Frank Darabont actually acquired one of these Dollar Babies way back in the day. It was a short story that I believe is from Night Shift called The Woman in the Room. And it's a drama. It has some, somewhat upsetting elements, but it's not a horror piece. Frank Darabont acquired the rights to that, adapted that film. I have seen it. It is very, very difficult to find, but I have seen it several years ago, many years ago. But then he went on to direct 3 other Stephen King pieces, The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, and The Mist. Of all 4 of those pieces, The Mist is probably the only horror film. Green Mile has some supernatural, somewhat horrific elements to it, but is still mostly a drama. The Mist is a horror film, a straight-up horror film. I can remember seeing this in the theater with a buddy who absolutely, at the time, maybe he feels differently about it now, but at the time, he hated this movie. Hated it. Entirely revolving around the ending. So I want to hear, I have lots and lots to say about this film and its history and all these other kind of things, but I want to hear your sort of history with the film. This was not your first time seeing it. I know that, right?
It was not. I did see it. I didn't see it in the theater. I honestly don't remember the context in which I saw it. Like if it was with anyone. I imagine what it was as I was newly acclimating myself to Stephen King material, a decade ago or whatever. That you just kind of check off a list, like, oh, I'm going to check this out.
Sure.
And I will get to why some of this would be dissonant if all I love it. I think it's a fantastic. I think it's a fantastic film. It's depressing as anything. I mean, it is
so heavy,
dark, and it is heavy, and my goodness. But in terms of it's got some datedness to it in terms of the effects, especially, but in terms of structurally, it does well. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on the show, but I remember reading Under the Dome, and I won't spoil the end of Under the Dome, unlike $1 Million Baby, apparently. But Under the Dome, one of the things I loved so much about it is even with the book, I didn't bother with the series. Apparently it wasn't worth bothering with, but one of the things I love about Under the Dome is this sort of microcosm societal kind of examination. Like that was really fascinating to me in that book. And I think this kind of replicates that, though it drills down even, more granularly to this, as you alluded to earlier, this grocery store setup, that has clear kind of factions and things that present, how to deal with what they're experiencing. But no, I actually have not read this text. So, I did do a little dive on some of the comparisons between the two. And so I know some of that stuff, but I haven't read the text. But no, I really appreciate this film. I suppose love is strong, but appreciate is definitely an easy statement to make, and I'm kind of glad to be talking about it.
Yeah, I would say for myself, I absolutely love this film. I understand why somebody would have difficulties loving it. Just, I mean, even the reactions that Darabont got and sort of initial screenings were very polarizing. There were people who came up to him very distressed and distraught and said, you need to change that ending. And then there were other people who came up to him also distressed, also distraught, and said, please don't change that ending. It's too perfect. Please don't change it. Do you want to
go ahead and summarize that?
Sure. So basically the brief premise of the film, and we are going to spoil a lot because there's some things to go into that will just be easier if you know as much as possible. So in brief, there is a huge storm. The storm does damage to lots of neighborhood properties in this sort of coastal Maine town. Maine, not Maine as in like Main Street, Maine as in like the state. And so then these two individuals, David Drayton and Mr. Norton, and David's son Billy, make their way into the local grocery store just to pick up some repair supplies, duct tape, stuff like that, some essential groceries because everybody's power's out. Well, then, while they're in this grocery store, over the horizon comes this fog. It's actually a mist, and it's very pervasive and thick and heavy, and it sweeps in and sweeps over the entire town. It saturates everything. They barricade themselves in this grocery store and very quickly realize that there are things within the mist. There are creatures of sorts, very otherworldly. You could call them supernatural, but they're just really just other dimensional creatures. They're not like specters or ghosts. They're like prehistoric kind of monsters, if you will. And they're in this mist. The grocery store then begins to divide up into some differing factions, those who don't quite believe all of this stuff that they're seeing or that there is any danger in the mist, those who are kind of meant to be our good guys, our primary good guys, led by David Drayton, Thad Jane. And so there's that group, and then there is this ultra-zealous, very sort of cultish religious group that rises up, led by Mrs. Carmody, who is the primary human villain in the film. And she whips everybody into something of a religious frenzy. These factions develop. What I'm alluding to at the end is we will probably get into some of the particulars about what goes on inside the grocery store through the bulk of the movie, but eventually our heroes, as it were, manage to make their way out into the mist, get into a vehicle, and begin to drive away. The mist is thick and extends for many, many miles. They make their way to a place where they have run out of gas, and they are basically stuck. They feel that they will be surrounded by monsters, and our main character has a gun. There are 5 of them in the car with him, including his son. And this is very heavy, y'all, if you have not seen this. So, including his son, there are 5 of them in the car. He has 4 bullets. And they basically make a choice together that rather than let the monsters get them, they will end things right here. And he has the unenviable position of basically pulling the trigger. And he does. He pulls the trigger on everybody in the car except for himself, yes, including his son. So brutal to even think about this. And then the moment that happens, he is obviously on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He exits the car and begins to scream out so that some monstrous thing will come and find him and put him out of his misery, given what has happened. He's just sort of, shaking his fist at the wind. And when he does that, he indeed hears a rumbling in the distance. What he discovers is that rumbling in the distance is actually a huge tanker leading a caravan of soldiers and civilians through the mist as they are killing the monsters effectively, dispelling the mist effectively. He and his entire car of people were merely moments away from being permanently rescued, and he made that drastic decision to end all of their lives just minutes before they were about to be rescued. That is the end of this film. that is how this film ends, is our good guy makes a devastating choice and then has nothing to show for it but pain and agony and distress and despair. That is the end of that's the end of The Mist. That is not how the book ends. You said you didn't read it, right?
Yeah, I know that the ending is different. I can't remember what the original ending is, though.
Essentially, the ending is a non-ending. They escape the confines of the. There's a lot of beats in the film that are in the book. In the book, the basic core group of people, minus one, the older guy, Jeffrey DeMunn, his character's name is Dan Miller. He's in the car with them at the end of the film. He did not make it to the car in the book. But the other four of them, those same four characters, did make it in. And so in the book, what happens, because the book is a first-person narrative, it's David Drayton writing down his thoughts. And so the book ends as he has just basically written down his final words in a journal and left the journal for somebody to find. And basically what he says is, this is the end of the journal, run out of pages, basically. We're going to try to make it to Hartford. And so he leaves that journal, and they drive off into the mist. And that's it. So you do not know what happens to them at the end of the book. They just drive off into the mist.
So there's not even an allusion to the mist being dispelled?
Not an allusion to the mist being dispelled at all. There's no hope that the mist will ever rise. Now, one element of the film that is alluded to in the book is David Drayton's character does say very specifically, he says, if worse comes to worse, I have a gun with 3 bullets, and I'll do what I need to do. So he says that, but that does not happen at the end of the book. And there's no necessarily idea. Now, they do hear this word, this name of a nearby town called Hartford, and basically and the final lines of the book are, he says, I have 2 words on my mind. One of them is Hartford, the other one is hope. And that's how the book ends.
Interesting.
So, and what's so interesting is because Darabont had been wanting to adapt this piece for many years, he got like a $30 million budget from Paramount, and was going to make, they basically said, we'll give you $30 million to make this film, and I don't have $30 million, but we're going to give you $30 million to make this film, but their stipulation was you have to change this ending. The ending cannot be that bleak disaster if you're going to make this film at Paramount. So he then went to Dimensions Films, and that went through a major, just a small fraction of that budget, even made this film without a director's salary so that he could get it made purely so that he could make it at a studio that would allow him to keep this ending. There's a little, on the DVD version that I have of the film, there's a little conversation that he's having with Stephen King, and he shares the story with Stephen King. He said, I went in there and I met with the producers at Dimension Studios, and I sat down and I looked them right in the eye. I forget the name of the person he's talking to. He says, I looked him right in the eye and I said, all right, if I'm going to do this, you can't touch my ending. Period.
Wow.
This is my ending. If we're going to do this at all, if you have any interest in changing this ending, this conversation needs to go no further, because I'm not making this film without this ending. And thankfully they agreed, and everything else proceeded. Like I said, the ending is next level bold, and Darabont put his money where his mouth is, because he even did not get paid for the film. I think there may have been like if it's financially successful, back end deal, but he did not have an upfront salary to make this film, so that he could have the creative control he needed to do this. I have a couple of other trivial bits if you want to before we get in. Do you have any specific trivial bits to share before we get into the specifics of the film?
You can go ahead. I don't have anything super specific.
I just wanted to mention, and this is again about the text of the film, that this novella was originally published in a magazine, like a publication of horror anthology called Dark Forces, and it was actually in a longer version. It was abbreviated down to be included as the first story in Skeleton Crew, Stephen King's collection. So it can be found as a standalone paperback, or it can be found as the beginning of Skeleton Crew, or in that Dark Forces anthology. But it has one of my favorite opening lines of any Stephen King story, which its simplicity, I think, is very powerful. It just says, "This is what happened," and puts a period on it. And I just love
That's cool.
the tight power of that sentence. The other thing that I have is that Frank Darabont, there's a big apocryphal story about his involvement here, but he developed and launched the Walking Dead TV series. He,
Right.
Was the creative control behind the first season. There's a lot of rumors and stories flying around about why he and AMC parted ways, and there's actually a full legal battle right now between him and AMC about shared profit deal and all this other thing. But there is a tremendous amount of Walking Dead alumni in this film. There's like 7.
Carol.
Yeah, Carol's in it. Also, Dale, Jeffrey DeMunn is in there. Andrea is in there. Laurie Holden. There are like 4 others, but they must have been smaller characters because I did not remember them being in the show. Those are some of the more prominent ones.
Well, and I did see Greg Nicotero's name flash in the credits. Who became, I think, the production designer for the show, and then ended up, I think, showrunning The Walking Dead.
I'm sure you can. I'm going to let you say it in case you caught it and want to. Did you catch what he's painting up top?
Oh, of course. That's Roland. Child Roland to the Dark Tower came. I mean, that's not the child version of him, but yes, that's Roland Deschain from the Dark Tower series.
Exactly. Those paintings were actually all done by legendary movie poster artist and just legendary artist in general, Drew Struzan, most known for painting the iconic Star Wars posters and several others.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Do you have any other specific bits?
No, I don't. No,
I've got one more major one, but okay, so there
make way for the major bits, yeah.
Oh, here it is. I don't know that it's that major, but I found it great. There is an audio adaptation of The Mist that's like an hour and 12 minutes long, and it's specifically designed to be listened to in headphones because they have surround sound effects where things from The Mist are like flying past you, and if you're wearing headphones, the sonic mix makes it sound like they are actually flying past you, and it's very impressive. So that's lots of fun and very scary. If you can seek, it is still available. If you can seek it out, I definitely think it's worth seeking out and listening to. But my trivial bit is that the character of Jim in this, Bill Sadler, he is a prominent player in Frank Darabont's work. You would probably know his face. He's the guy. In this film, he's the one who initially insists that Norm the bag boy go out and check, and he's very confrontational with David Drayton, and then ultimately, like once...
Is he the one who becomes the zealot, or is he the tall, dark-headed one?
No, he becomes the zealot.
Okay.
So that actor played David Drayton in the Mist audio adaptation, and I thought that was really cool. So anyway, that's all I have for basically just like trivial bits. What you got for likes, dislikes, and all that good stuff?
I mean, so many. One actually, I didn't write this down, but a brief trivial bit here is they did film a scene for the opening of some sort of bad thing going down at the Arrowhead facility, and they just kind of ended up cutting it from the edit.
I heard that it was actually Andre Braugher who plays Mr. Norton, that was actually his request, suggestion, whatever you want to call it. That he had dinner with had dinner with Frank Darabont and was basically like, "Do you really need that scene?" And then Darabont later reflected on it and was like, "No, he was right. We didn't need that scene."
Yeah, it doesn't. The text doesn't miss it at all. I do appreciate. I wouldn't have known this because I haven't read the text, but. Apparently in the text, the Laurie Holden character, who's the teacher of the blonde in this, and Drayton like get it on at the grocery store at some point, like have some sort of intimacy.
They do.
That I was glad they cut. I mean because there is a world where you could start pushing some scenarios in this circumstance that stretch believability.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think it makes for a much richer, sweeter relationship between them that's not there in the film.
I agree.
It kind of means more. So I do like that did not make it in.
King has actually gone on record and said that he hasn't implied that he would take it out if he could do it over, but King has officially said that he does not like that David Drayton sleeps with her. And he specifically said, I don't like that he does that when he still does not know what has happened to his wife.
Right. And he shouldn't have written it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But no, I mean, that was just a couple of interesting comparisons between the two. As far as likes, dislikes, I mean, the cast is just wildly stacked. I mean, there's just a deep, deep bench of talent here. I mean, like, I texted you, Marcia Gay Harden is both wretched and you can't look away from her. She's
oh my gosh, magnetic.
So compelling in this film. I love the it is cool. I referenced on Us last week the desire and how I wish I'd been able to watch that film a second time. Like there's just such a sort of liberating aspect that comes when you're revisiting a piece of work that like you can engage it less academically and more just kind of sensorially, just
sure,
kind of engage with what it's actually after. And
absolutely.
And so you pick up on more filmmaking flourishes. And I love the sequence in the grocery store as things are ramping up. Like there's we've hung in the grocery store for a few minutes, and then the authorities are there and the sirens ramp up outside. It's really, there's this steady kind of ratcheting tension until Jeffrey DeMond comes running across the parking lot bloodied, yelling, "There's something in the mist." That's a great sequence.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just love the progression of the entire narrative. What you've just described is incredibly effective, but just the way each of the individual tensions ratchet up scene by scene by scene, I find very, very effective. But it has a nice rhythm to it, a nice balance, if you will, that it's not constant tension. That you like after every big bombastic, sort of suspense scene, you get a little bit of breathing room, whether it's just with characters sort of quietly planning or plotting, trying to make the next decision, or if it's something a little bit more pushing the story forward. It has a nice rhythm to it, I think. I felt like I was easily an hour and 15, 20 minutes into the movie before I even registered how long it had been. Like the movie's very propulsive.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot about it.
I will say, I mean, to call this a dislike is a little bit unfair. Part of it, especially knowing the budgetary, I guess you'd call them constraints, the CGI has not aged well whatsoever, and I don't know. I wouldn't go so far as to say that hurts the film, because I think the strength of this narrative is the people, and so but I do think with a more robust effects budget or a 2019 type of technology at its disposal, some of these creatures would come off a little more threatening and a little less like just CGI tentacles, Yeah,
sure. Well, what's interesting, and going back to our Springtime for Shyamalan days, I was teased, and rightfully so, for occasionally, and this is a habit, I've not brought it up for over a year, but a habit I have is if I'm very familiar with a film, sometimes I will rewatch the film in black and white. Just turn the color off of the TV and watch it in black and white just to see how it changes the tone, what you focus on different things, and it's very interesting to me. Now, this is an instance. I only watch The Mist in black and white. I will never watch it. I don't watch it. I shouldn't say never, but I don't watch it otherwise. And that's because this is a film that Frank Darabont specifically wanted to be in black and white. That was one of Dimension's, the battles with the Dimension Studios that he lost. He wanted it to be presented in black and white. In fact, digitally, if you buy what is referred to as the director's cut of the film, you can buy it digitally through like Vudu. I think you can even get the director's cut through iTunes and stuff like that. If you buy the director's cut, it is the identical film. There's no scene changes. There's no scene extensions or anything like that. It is the identical film, but it's in black and white, and you can't, and so it's presented in black and white.
Do you know? Have you read to know why he so passionately was after that?
Because I think it is a throwback to like the old monster movies, the old classic sort of chamber pieces, those old scenarios where there's these just basically the old creature features of the 50s, and I think he wanted to evoke that again. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up right now is because I will say they still look a little dated, but they look alarmingly better in black and white. It's the color.
Yeah,
it's the color. It's
the color and the texture. Yeah.
Yes, and when your visual aesthetic is purely grays and blacks and whites, there is a lot. Like for instance, I noted the scene when David Drayton is trying to the sort of pterodactyl-esque thing is ablaze and making its way through that scene looks fantastic in black and white. It looks great. You can barely tell. Obviously, you mentally know it's a CGI creation, but visually you can barely tell it, and that looks really fantastic. There are still some, like specifically the big wasps look a lot better in black and white. The tentacles kind of still look a little rough, but there are several creature creations. The spiders look terrifying.
It's terrible.
And they look really outstanding in black and white. All of the shots in The Mist, because The Mist has, if I'm remembering correctly, because I honestly have seen this film 4 or 5 times and have watched it only once in color, and that was in the theater. I think The Mist has kind of a bluish tint to it. Am I right about that?
I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just leave it to be.
I'm just sure. I guess.
But my point being, like, it's very sort of it's just this sort of white haze, this grayish white haze that comes over. It's really effective. So yeah, I recommend more so than most of the times when I watch a film in black and white. That's just my experimental choice. This is a film that it is documented the director wants people to see in black and white. So if you have that capability and want to watch this film that way, I strongly, strongly recommend it. I think it is a better viewing experience because you don't get as hung up on how dated the effects are. I really think that's true.
What's some stuff on your likes, dislikes list?
So just cutting down through the list a little bit, I really, really love Andre Braugher. He's not in the film very long. He's only in the first half of the film. I like that we don't find out what happens to him. You can make assumptions, but I like that we don't find out what happens to him, especially given the ending. I like that we don't know. But in the book, his character does pretty much the same thing, but in the book, it is definitively stated that his character does not make it. His character does not survive. But the way Andre Braugher approaches his performance is so alarmingly layered. He's bombastic and he's very big and broad, but then he also is able to bring it down to fine-tuned sort of sharp barbs, particularly where he gets upset and thinks that they're teasing him about the monster in the loading dock. And so I just absolutely love his performance, and it's one of my favorite moments in the film, and probably my favorite line in the film is that small exchange they have before he makes his way out, where he says, I wish I could talk you. There's no way I can talk you out of this, is there? And he says, there's nothing out there, nothing in the mist. And he says it almost like a whisper, there's nothing in the mist. And then he says, what if you're wrong? And I love his delivery of well, then the joke really would be on me. And there's a lot. Andre Braugher's an old pro. It's great to see him in a performance like this, and I think he does an outstanding job with what he's given. On the same token, flipping that over, I put Marcia Gay Harden is so amazing, and then I put, but Ms. Carmody is the literal worst. She is so dreadfully awful as a character, and it is very akin to the way she is in the book. That is not really embellished very much. That's how she is.
I mean, I think my new life statement when someone like that I'm not really a fan of wants to get to know me better is I'm just going to look at them real squarely and be like, the day I need a friend like you, I'll just have myself a little squat and one out.
Oh my gosh. What?
Yeah, she's amazing. She's amazing.
Yeah, it's an outstanding performance, a very committed performance. She didn't want to do this film because she didn't want to be in a horror film, and it was actually Andre Braugher. She called him.
Interesting.
And he told her to approach the story as if it were just an actor's ensemble and not part of a larger horror film. And I think she just hits it out of the park.
Well, it's funny you say that. I mean, I didn't know that anecdote, but I think one of the notes I did make is just the casting in this. Not just as in you have talented people, but I just mean these look like normal people. Now, Laurie Holden's an attractive woman, and so you can make a case, kind of from a just general attractive stance, but not
Thad
every.
Jane's pretty sexy.
Thad Jane is sexy. I mean, he doesn't have the hair in this one, so I mean, you can only be so sexy without that hair. But point being, it's a diverse look. it's a diverse looking cast. They look like normal people. It does feel like an ensemble drama,
Right.
and that's a cool experience, but one inherent to this, kind of single location type of piece.
Right. Absolutely.
I will say, as much
ahead.
as I love me some Marcia Gay Harden, as much as I love me some Stephen King, as much as I love me some Frank Darabont, when are we gonna get it through our head that it is not Revelations?
I know. And I think
that feels like a really weird omission for professionals.
I know. No, I know. Well, it's even more alarming when you hear it come out of the mouths of pastors. I'm not going to get on a soapbox right now, but yes, that it colloquially, it is so frequently.
Where do you think that phrase "get on a soapbox" comes from?
You stop. Oh, stop. So
Steve Beckley, our continuity expert, should find where we initially talked about soapboxes.
Yes, he should. Speaking of continuity, there's probably a whole host of listeners that have no idea why we keep calling Thomas Jane Thad Jane.
That's a pretty recent, bit.
Sure, but if you're just checking out The Mist because you never saw Before I Wake, then you're not gonna know.
Before I Wake was like 3 weeks ago.
No, but I'm saying
go ahead, Wilfred.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to explain it here. I'm going to tell them to go listen to the Before I Wake episode.
Right.
But so a couple more things. Some of the stuff would probably classify as scares, but here's one line that I just absolutely love, and I love it when old Mrs. Tough old Mrs. Repple says, they stone. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but she's like, they stone people in the Bible, don't they? And she says, and I got lots of peas. I just love that line. Yeah, I really dig that line.
That's immediately preceded by her "Shut up, you miserable buzzard." Is that?
Yes, she throws that can of peas at Mrs. Carmody, and she's like, "Shut up, you miserable old buzzard." She's like, "It's okay to stone people they do it in the Bible all the time, and I got lots of peas." I loved it so much.
I can tell. Yeah,
I did. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
So. Some of the rest of my list, I do love, but they would be classified in the scares category. Do you want to pivot there?
Yeah, this can bridge that gap. I think Marcia Gay Harden's death scene is amazing. Like that.
Yes.
I mean, and not just because you've come to hate the character so much, but just it's the way it's executed. I mean, directorially, you kind of understand from how that scene is constructed why Frank Darabont has the reputation he has as a more than talented filmmaker. I mean, she's whipped these folks into a frenzy. And again, we haven't named him yet, but Toby Jones, come on,
he's
man.
so great in this. Yeah,
it's
so great.
It's Arnim Zola himself, he just it's before, I guess actually continuity wise at this point, he's already long since aligned with Red Skull, and maybe he's rematerialized himself, reconstituted himself here. Yeah. It's just MCU, Stephen King verse, all of it. But, all things serve the beam. Hey, Endgame's going to come out like a week after this airs, or maybe the week this airs.
Well,
what?
We're remiss to also mention that last week Game of Thrones started, but don't even get me started on that.
I can't because. Yeah,
time travel.
Right. But no, so her death scene is really expertly executed on camera, the burst milk bottle, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, let's bridge some scares. Other than I reference what I feel like is pretty low bar CGI, but even that notwithstanding, the dock massacre is awful.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes, this was so brutal.
That's rough.
Especially given, the conflict that happened right before it started. And it's very upsetting. There is a lot of, I'm going to try make every effort not to point out every single difference between the book and movie here, but the movie is pretty faithful. That's what happens to Norm in the book. The movie's pretty faithful, diverging really only in a couple of smaller places and majorly at the ending, but the rest of the major beats of the movie are present in the book. One major scare for me, oh my gosh. Do I quote it the way I wrote it, Nathan?
Quote it the way you wrote it?
Those spiders.
Whoa! Yeah, I just wrote Spider-Man. Yeah, that's awful.
My gosh,
are you referring to the like normal life-sized version ones? Or are you referring to the incubator version?
Oh no, I'm
of
referring to
Spider-Man?
I'm referring to the man who has
Oh my
suffered
God. Oh my
one
God.
of the worst fates that I have ever seen happen to anybody in anything. That is the worst. That's the worst scene of anything that we have ever watched anywhere, anytime. That is so dreadfully awful
He
and
just
terrible.
went into the Spider-Verse.
Oh my God. I like that movie. I don't like this.
Yeah.
I don't like this at all. And for those of you who found my language it was beeped, but those of you who found my language harsh, yeah, watch the scene. You'll agree.
Yeah.
You will likely say something very similar. Something that I think is just dreadful. I wrote it in my sort of scares category, but it's just so dreadful. The way they respond to Private Jessup after they have
You just jump into the worst stuff. I mean, you like skip the whole nighttime sequence with the bugs and the birds and the swollen necks and the fire
I have that on
starting.
my list too. I have that on my
Okay.
list too.
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
I mean, you went to the existential one. Let's keep with the freaky first. And then
Okay. Yes.
The giant nasty bug on Carmody's bosom. You know. Hey, come on. Is that a stand quote? She says, "My life for you."
Oh, that's absolutely a stand quote. Yeah, there's no way it would be otherwise because it's not
yeah.
a novel.
Yeah. Hashtag 19.
Yeah. It's interesting, and this I don't want to pivot us to theme, but like it's interesting. Take note, listeners, of the fact that this dreadful wasp thing does not sting her, and she perceives that as an endorsement of her zealous righteousness. That this wasp lands directly on her and does not sting her. I don't want to get too deep into that because I have some thoughts on it for perhaps
Sounds
for later.
Like it.
But yeah,
little teaser.
But yeah, when that first wasp hit the window, I jumped.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
that was awful.
Yeah,
that's awful.
That's a poop club moment.
Yes, it is. Oh my gosh, so dreadful.
Well, yeah. So I pulled you back from it, but go into where you were. I don't even know the character's name.
Private Jessup. And Private Jessup is actually one of the additional fabrications for the film. That character is not in the book at all. In the book, the two military agents that hang themselves are the only military presence in the grocery store. So that scene exists, but Private Jessup was an invented character particularly to raise the stakes and heighten the stakes.
Does it ever?
Yes, indeed. It is so painfully dreadful what they do to him and how they respond out of fear and bloodlust, and it's awful. It's absolutely awful. So that's pretty awful.
Ollie's death kind of sucks.
Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. This big lobster, red lobster bisque
lobstrosity.
thing, like the lobstrosity. Yes, comes out and just snaps him. It's just it's.
Did you just
really,
say lobster bisque? That thing's gonna come for you. You better be careful.
What'd you call me? So, but then the other thing that I just find so dreadful. There's two things that I just find really, really dreadful. Again, I put them in scares. Could easily pivot to theme, but they don't have to. First is something that happens very early in the film, and it happens in the book. But there's a major difference in the book and Darabont's film, is when she's Carol. McBride is the actor's last name. I'm trying to remember what Melissa McBride. Yes. So when Melissa McBride, which is a really powerful moment, is begging for somebody to accompany her home, and the way she put, is, "Will anybody see a lady home?" That's a line from the book. Won't anybody see a lady home? And she just makes her way out anyway. In the book, that character does not make it, and they discover her body as they are traversing out from the mist. But I find it significantly powerful and haunting that in this iteration she does make it, and it is all the more damning when she looks at David Drayton and he's like, "I've got my own to worry about," and it's just a really, really haunting moment. The other thing that haunts me tremendously is, for obvious reasons, little Billy Drayton's line to his dad, "Promise me you won't let the monsters get me." Oh my gosh.
I'm glad you brought him up because he was on my notes earlier. That kid's great. He's
he's
great.
wonderful in this. Yes,
I mean,
yes, he's
that's
really
a-
outstanding.
That's a real actor. I mean,
And so much is demanded of him.
Yeah.
In this film, yeah, he does an outstanding job, really outstanding job.
One last note I have on scares, and I can happily bounce us into theme here, or let us go there. Is I love for all the grief I might give much of the real visible CGI. The scene of that last mammoth creature as the car's bouncing, that's
so outstanding, isn't it?
Oh,
so
it's
outstanding.
Great.
And that is one in the book, that is a really, really, like, it's sort of a fan favorite moment, because it's almost an echo of Jurassic Park, 20 years before Jurassic Park came out. But they're sitting in the Jeep, the whole Jeep is just convulsing with some mammoth thing, and it the echoes that it points to how expansive the mist must be if a creature of that size exists in it. It's it's a fantastic scene.
And it's just a really scene. Great execution in the film of that image of them looking up through the windshield and the car just bouncing up and down. It's great.
Oh my gosh, it's great. Yeah, that is a really, really wonderful scene.
So how you wanna wrestle this one down, brother?
Oh man, it's so difficult. It's so difficult. I'll make a comment that I've made many, many times before. I'm going to presume that most of our listeners have also seen Frank Darabont's wildly more popular and rightfully so film, The Shawshank Redemption. I have conversations from time to time with people about why you watch horror films, why you make films like this, what you do, all of that sort of thing. And I've pointed out to people before that I was like, well, Frank Darabont made two films which you could loosely summarize at least one of the themes as never give up hope. But there are two ways to tell that story. And the first way, somewhat the Shawshank Redemption way, is never give up hope, and all may be right in the end. The other way to tell that story is the Mist way, where at least a central theme is not to give up hope, but by showing a character who gives up hope, as we've already expressed, literally moments before a hope held onto would have been fulfilled, and how dreadful and devastating a scenario like that is, and how powerful it is to consider those kinds of options and those kinds of possibilities when you're trying to wrestle down what is right and good for you to do in any given moment or scenario. I don't know if that's a starting place for us, but that is definitely on my mind a lot about this film.
Well, I think a touch and go theme, I am not ignoring what you just said because I want that general conceit to be our landing place, but we can't walk past I believe Laurie Holden's character's name is Amanda, but the confrontation in the loading dock, and it's not Drayton. Who else is in there?
Ollie's in there.
Is it Toby? Yeah,
Dan.
I think it's Ollie who says, if you scare people badly enough, you can get them to do anything. They'll turn to whoever promises a solution.
Yep, I wrote that down too.
That's
a
rather prophetic line for what? Nathan? No, that's all right. I'll let you take yourself there. So I didn't know the kind of, honestly, in a vacuum, I would have said I knew that Darabont did Shawshank and Green Mile. It wasn't on my mind when I was rewatching this. So I wasn't pondering those as in conversation with each other.
And in fairness, I'm not sure that they are. I usually put them there, but yeah.
Gotcha. But this, and I also had not read the Mist text. So at the top of our conversation, once we were finally getting into the text or the material, you said of the prose that a line from it is, there were two words on my mind. One is Hartford. The other is hope.
Exactly. It's the last line of the book.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting. I didn't know these things rewatching the film. And so it says something that's the frequency I was able to tap into.
Yeah.
Because those concepts were primary to me. And in fact, what I wrote down is, this is not a hopeful story by any means, but is it a hopeful film? And I guess we would sort of depend on how we define hope, right? I mean, I've referenced this numerous times on the show. If you, my friend, can push me towards this, knowing your recent acquisition, I might get a tattoo this year. But like this notion of the fool for hope is something that has circled my spirit, and not even circled, embedded itself in my spirit and being this last half decade, because having endured my own journey through a mist, I know what it's like to feel that the monsters are around you and that you just don't know if the mist is going to evaporate.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't have put those terms on it, but that matters, and that is an applicable metaphor. And in my, like, literally in the thick of my mist, I recognized the observable foolishness of pushing into what I was pushing into, the choices I was making to press forward. And so, but I knew the choices I was making was born of a hope I had. And so this fool for hope idea came, has kind of emblazoned itself kind of in and on my spirit. And what I wrote down, and we can feel free to use this as a launch pad for these ideas, but what I wrote is, what is hope? And this is me just sort of thinking out loud for myself too, of how to articulate this, but appropriating some of the imagery. And you made a good point a minute ago about why do we watch horror? One of those things is to be able to name and diminish fear, right?
Yeah.
Those,
right.
or those things that would seek to instill it in us, instill fear in us. Well, this is another one that you use these things as metaphor. You look at what David Drayton goes through only to end up doing. And what I wrote is that hope is in a parched, arid, dry, wasted, cracked land that is overrun with monsters and predators, which are pulling flesh from friends and rending the spirit from loved ones. Somehow, hope is fragile, tentative, unsure, often weary, mostly tiny steps through the mist, pressing into and through and past that as best as we are able, trusting the spirit to guide as loss after loss plagues, heading forward, letting none succumb as able, heading forward to a dawn and a swift sunrise of rescue. And like this movie, the reason this movie is heartbreaking, this is what's fascinating about this movie and why it's interesting to me. I know nothing of Darabont's kind of personal life and journey, but there's such a case to be made that this movie is such a cautionary tale about giving up hope, and why its ending is such a litmus test for people's spirits. It's like, it's utterly heartbreaking. I'm not diminishing that. Like absolutely. It is terrible and tragic, but it's are people recoiling from just the terrible tragedy, or are they not able to recognize in their own selves, well, what would I do? Would I
right
would I press forward into this darkness with it's foolishness. It is foolishness. No one can practically, like, on its face, you can't indict David. Like, like on its face, from a purely rational, reasonable, logical, like practical level, he isn't quote unquote wrong. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I have a little bit of pushback, but not to your idea.
And hear me. I'm not saying this is an appropriate course of action. I'm simply saying,
sure.
Given the circumstances, you at least understand. You can see why this character in Darabont's version does what he does. And yet we recognize in it by his own gut reaction at the end that he recognizes I gave up hope.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's a really powerful, and that's all I'm trying to say in terms of like, it's a litmus test. Like, are you recoiling just because he does this terrible thing, or are you recognizing his own awareness of not the physical act he's performed, but the spiritual loss he's embraced?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't call David an evil character, but there's a way in which this act untethers him from his own humanity. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm just kind of riffing, so feel free to jump in.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So there's this fundamental defeat that it strikes me as so powerful and definitely cautionary that they see this as the only potential option for them.
Right.
Because now and this is to your point, they have witnessed atrocities.
Right.
It is not as if these fears that drive them to these choices are pure fabrication. One of the reasons Mrs. Carmody is able to whip everyone into a frenzy, including Jim, who was initially very contentious to her. One of the reasons she's able to make him a zealot for her cause is because of what he witnesses in the pharmacy and what he begins to see play out. And then you suddenly start to get super biblical, and I use that word biblical as in like, Old Testament apocryphal kind of thing, like where it's like, oh my gosh, there's some monsters swarming around in the mist, and I do not know what to do. And it is something that they see no other alternative. They don't see an ending for themselves that does not contain pain and suffering and horrors beyond their imagination of what is cope-worthy.
And we didn't even, I'm sorry to cut you off, but to further substantiate where you're going here, like, one of the most challenging scenes in this film isn't the act. It's that moment in the car before it.
Yes.
It's that mutual, unspoken agreement they all make between themselves. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's crazy how it's done with no words.
Oh, it's
crazy.
It's brilliant. It's an amazing scene.
And it is something that I think, have you seen, I'm not going to go into too much about it because maybe we'll eventually cover it or whatever, but have you seen the original screenplay that Stephen King wrote for television called Storm of the Century? Have you ever seen that?
I know what you're talking about, but no, I haven't seen it.
Okay, so there is an element to that. That is also a rather grim tale. That's as much as I'll say about it. But there is an element to it where he's exploring, and King has explored this in a couple of places. We've talked before how there's some stories that end with, people of faith being validated, vindicated. Often it's their faith that sort of carries them through a thing, and this hopeful notion sort of gets them to the other side of a piece. But King also has a handful of stories where the exact opposite happens, where it seems like generally decent people make a couple of choices to either align themselves on a particular path, or they give up hope at crucial key moments, and things just do not go well for them, despite their inherent decency. And one of the things, it's a line in Storm of the Century. This is a very bleak line, and it does not align with my theology, but I'm pointing it out to point something else out about the mist. In Storm of the Century, a character is reflecting on the story of Job, and he says that his best understanding, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he says, my best understanding of what Job went through is a man looking to God and saying, why me? And God looking back at him and saying, there's just something about you that pisses me off.
Wow.
And it's a terribly bleak vision of, just interaction with a force beyond yourself. But as you approach, now pivoting back from Storm of the Century into The Mist, there is this sensibility. Not only would they not turn to hope in like a divine providence, as it were, because their expression of the expression of faith, and listeners don't see the air quotes I'm making, the expression of faith that they have borne witness to is the Miss Carmody version.
Right.
And it is bloodlusty, and it is crying for the sacrifice of women and children, literally.
Right. Oh God,
and,
that scene.
And by the way, you mentioned, I still don't like the moment. I still don't think King should have written it. In the book, part of what drives her to want them as the sacrifices is because she knows what they've done.
Gotcha,
And so she uses that as fuel for the whole thing. But anyway, so that is the version. I mean, when you find yourself in that world where all objective evidence around you seems to make the verdict that you're alone. That's it. You're alone, and you are only surrounded by unspeakable pain and unimaginable agony, and you don't want to go out like that, and you want to, to make this choice of, okay, well, it's better to just end this way of my own agency rather than, suffer whatever it is out there in the midst. And I don't even know how effectively to wrestle it down, but that utter abandonment of hope, the declaration inside your heart and mind that there is no reason for me to even see what happens. There's no reason for me to even hold on. They could have easily the van is locked. They could have easily just, okay, well, there's nothing immediate here. We don't have to get out of the van or out of the Jeep. We can just sit in this Jeep and wait things out. And had they done that for, Nathan, 10 more minutes, that's all it would have taken for them to be. And there's an old song by Rich Mullins, and it's a very sweet song, but it's called "Verge of a Miracle," and it talks a lot about that. Like, you walk right up to the brink of breakthrough, and turn around because you think there's too much, there's too much left to go, and that you can't push any further, and stepping right up to the edge. Yeah, go ahead.
I just think, like, what's powerful to me, and you brushed up against this a minute ago, like, on the one hand, I don't indict those passengers at the end. Like, I'm not endorsing. I'm simply saying, based on their given evidence and what they'd borne witness to as answers, they did what they thought was correct based on the given evidence, based on the given circumstances. But what's interesting to me and what I wrote down about this movie is that why I love the microcosm approach that this grocery store scenario provides is what it tells you is that civics, politics, and defense, social structure, religion, none of these things will save you in the mist. The only thing that will save you is tentative, tiny, measured, purposeful, intentional steps forward, born only of the hope that the mist will dissipate, and that is itself faith, right? They, and again, I don't indict them for this. I think they were not equipped to handle this, but that is the utmost. That is the definition of faith, is it not? Like that.
Yeah.
The mist will lift. Well, we saw them, and this happened, and that happened, and that the mist will lift. Like, well, you have the mist will lift. But she's a crazy person, right? That's not faith. It's not. It is religion. It is scare tactic. It is
power and control.
It is superstition. And my dear friend, you know this. This is what we see in our culture today. Like all of that is active and present and forceful, that tries to prescribe you a way through the mist when what is actually required is the foolishness that says, I have faith that the mist will lift.
Yes.
And you can finish this statement of, because God loves me. That feels very reductive and trite. I'm simply saying faith Faith is those tentative steps forward, born of the hope that care is right there. You know, like I just had that image totally mixing. You referenced Springtime for Shyamalan a minute ago, but that the Ivy's hand holds out in the, you know, waiting for Lucius, like that idea that those tentative steps forward that hold no proof of rescue.
No. Okay, so Nathan,
Read.
you're gonna make the preacher come out in me in just a second, because here's the thing, is so what you're declaring. I'm gonna two thoughts in quick succession. It's not only faith that the mist will lift. It's faith that even if it doesn't, there is a task ahead of me. The woman with children at home does not have any assurance that the mist will lift.
Right.
She just knows she has children at home that need her. And for all of the devastation of David, we like David Drayton. We like all the people in that car. We like them. They're good, decent people. But at the end, there is a woman who cared more about her two children, and they even tried to entice her by saying, like, hey, for their sake, stay in the mist. And she's like, no, for their sake, I've got to venture out into it. I've got to try this. And she is ultimately among the rescued. The other thing that you just woke up in me, pun intended, like a blaze, is it reminds me of what the three Hebrew children said to King Nebuchadnezzar when they were staring down the absolute verdict of a fiery furnace. And King Nebuchadnezzar looked at them. I don't have the scripture in front of me, but King Nebuchadnezzar looked at them and said, and it's in the book of Daniel, chapter 3, he says, is your God able to save you from me? Basically, is your God able to rescue you from my hand? And they say back to him, essentially, again, I'm paraphrasing, I should just pull up the scripture, but they say back to him, basically, look, his ability is not in question. He's able to. But even if he doesn't, we're not bowing to that.
Right.
Like even if he doesn't, we're not bowing down to that other thing. And what you're talking about, that was
such a great veggie tale.
I did love it. The tentative, continual steps through the mist. There is an even if he does not attitude that we need to adopt more than the things at which we want to shore up and protect ourselves from and barricade against the monsters in the mist.
Because what was so amazing, I'm remembering this now, watching the film, and I was so taken with the fact that, oh, that's Melissa McBride. You know, that was a really fun revelation there. But when she's exiting the store or trying to, I remember having this, and this is what the film is after, and so it did its work well, of this pang of, what would you do? Like, who are you in this story? Are you the one who cowers in fear at the unknown? And like, dude, like it's not even that the threat is unknown. They're watching their folks get murdered. Like, this is, it's not like there isn't real threat and they're unsure. It is, we know it's in there.
Yes.
But again, the fear that drives you to cower, or the self-sacrifice that drives you forward to, in her case, just into the unknown in order to be present and protecting her own children. And I think what really, like, just dents my heart to ponder in these scenarios is that just this notion of running the race. I don't want to dive too hard into that language, but I'm making it part of our tentative steps through the mist notion. Like, there are people who are going to fall off, like, and they may be peers and friends and loved ones. And I, you know, I don't know. I don't know if I mean to follow that path too heavily, but that's hope. That is how we sort of quantify hope. Is how into the mist are you willing to walk and traverse?
To venture, right?
You know,
right.
And that's a difficult question for all of us to wrestle with.
And a lot of times, and this would probably be my final thought on the situation, is a lot of times if you want to have your superstitions or your totems shored up, you'll find ways for that to happen, because I mentioned earlier about how the wasp does not sting Mrs. Carmody, which she leverages as verifiable proof that she is God's agent in it. And there's all kinds of reasons why that creature might not have stung her. She was very still. She was standing very still, wasn't moving. It landed on her clothes.
She's a terrible person. Maybe stinging to them is like an act of affection.
Exactly. So maybe it's like, I don't like you. I don't like your smell, so I'm going to leave. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why it might not have, but she leverages it and infuses purpose in that particular observation, right? And one of the things that we must be continually aware of is that faith is really a difficult walk of continual, steady, anchored, measured conviction, despite the swaying difference of objective evidence.
Right.
Like right now, you have conditions in which it would be very easy. It would be very easy to not only fabricate monsters in the mist; they can show them to you. They can absolutely create a thing for you to be afraid of and present it to you, and then say, "Okay, this is why we need to shore up the plate glass.
Yep.
This is why we need to cower ourselves over in here. This is why you need to follow this, follow that." And I do think there is an imperative to us to remember fundamentally, and this is one of the things that really devastates me about, you say you don't indict them at the end. I have compassion for them.
Hear me, don't hold me to that language. I'm just feeling out.
No,
my
I understand.
Right.
Sure. I have compassion for them,
yes.
Truly, because they have seen some things that that help me to, as you've said, understand the choice they make at the end. But they also fundamentally abandon certain things that it's like there are no other scenarios in which someone might consider to do a thing like that. And I feel like sometimes you have to, I keep going back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that like sometimes you have to say like, oh no, it's possible we could get out of this, but the fact is, even if we don't make it out of this, we're not doing that.
Right.
And I feel like so many believers of this day have abandoned fundamental this far no further boundaries and said like, oh no, but this justifies it. This justifies it, so we can abandon all of the compulsion to protect, the lost, to care for the impoverished. We can reject all of welcoming the stranger language, all of that kind of stuff, because this justifies it. And I feel like sometimes we're using this mist language. Sometimes you have to continually venture your way out into the mist where there be monsters, knowing that, hey, even if we don't make it out of this, we're not going there. Even if we are not rescued, even if we will not bow to that, we will not succumb to the abandonment of hope and the embrace of fear that would ultimately, because that's what he's left with. Yep. He and I mean, extending this film beyond where the film takes us, I don't see him making it much longer. Like there's no way he will be able to live with himself after the choice that he's made there. But that level of hope abandonment takes place so frequently on individual levels, and it's happening on a national level, and it happens on a community level where you just abandon the steady through line of what the Lord has given to us as a steady anchored hope, and instead say, no, don't you see the monsters in the mist? We have no choice. And we should all, conviction for myself, perhaps for our listeners, should all be more willing and ready to embrace this even if he does not attitude. Like, we are not going here. Regardless of the circumstance that you lay in front of me, we are not going here. And steadily, piece by piece, one foot in front of the other, make your way through the mist. And yes, in this film, two people do that. Two versions of people do that. One person ventures out into the mist alone, fearful for her children, and we see her safe with her children in her arms at the end of it. Another man ventures out with new friends and his child, and his story goes differently, to just put it that way. And the only difference was, in my very reductive imagination of this film, is the way they approached their mission and purpose and navigation of this mist and what their responsibility in it was. And I feel like, yes, there's mist all around us and there's monsters in them, but we have been given some very specific direction. And as we stay steady in that, yes, that road is narrow. Yes, that path is treacherous at times, but staying that course, whether or not we are rescued, there will be a very profound measure of hope to be had along the journey that we can build each other up in if we're so willing.
Right.
And I don't know. It's we've talked a lot on this film. We should probably go ahead and go to the fog meter. Are you good to go to the fog meter?
I don't know. That's the fog meter has a connotation of like mistiness to it, so I'm a little worried about going to it.
There's monsters in the.
I
in the
know,
fog meter.
but I want to stay in the grocery store and eat all the canned goods.
Yeah, we know you like those
crazy people.
Yeah, we know you like those Starburst jelly beans.
I do, brother.
And the Reese's. So
I would be that one. Like we'd be hanging out in the grocery store for like 10 days, and I'm like, nah, I'm good.
You'd eat all of them.
I'll eat the candy, while all the sensible people are eating the veggies and stuff.
We're well aware. We're well aware.
It's my cross to bear, brother. It's my cross to bear.
It's your sweet cross to bear.
Yeah.
So we measure every film that we discuss by the fog meter, fear, and God. So, Nathan, I would invite you to express your thoughts on the fear measurement of Frank Darabont's 2007 film based on the work by Stephen King, The Mist.
I'm going to give it a 7. I think that, the scare factor in terms of creature stuff is a little mitigated by the datedness of the production values, but that is completely offset by just all the existential stuff we've been talking about and a real tangible, palpable illustration of a hope lost.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Absolutely.
That is scary as hell and may in fact be hell.
Yeah. I'm going to give this film on the fear factor an 8. I would say easily 5 of those points are the ending itself. It's a very powerful, haunting, devastating, and effective ending. For the God measurement, the substance at play here, there's so many that we didn't even get into, so many lines about fear and denial that take place. This film is a pretty rich script for subject matters of that nature, and I feel like the ending has a lot of power to it as well. I'm going to go 8 for the God meter as well. I'm an 8 down the line for this film.
I'm gonna pull a Reed Lackey and one up you. I'm gonna 8.5 you, brother.
There it is.
I think for a plot that is actually kind of thin, it's a pretty basic kind of narrative. They get a ton of mileage out of the rich, dynamic, not just character interplay, but just sort of social dynamics. Like, what does it mean to be human in the face of threat? And I think that's a really powerful way they've done it. So looking like we are just a slight dial click above our former normal. Wow. Have you ever said the phrase former normal?
Former normal sounds complicated.
Former normal. Wow. So we are giving Frank Darabont's adaptation of Stephen King's The Mist an 8 on the fog meter, which feels well earned.
Absolutely.
I would ask Reed.
Yeah,
I would ask if you recommend it, but I feel like that's a kind of an
pretty
obvious
given
choice at this point.
I mean, this is the kind of film that I think people should see. I do highly recommend it. If you've listened to the episode, you know this already. If you were to take my recommendation and then just get mad at me because I subjected you to that film with that ending, all right, my bad. But I recommend it. It has a devastating ending, but it is a very, very powerful film.
Now, I guess, are you going to be hoity-toity, and if they don't have access to the black and white version, are you going to tell them not to watch it?
Yes.
Really?
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh.
No, if you don't have access to, anybody who has access to a TV can turn the color off on their TV, so everybody has access.
Well, yeah, but
to the black and white.
If you didn't initially know that was like a
No, but no, of
thing.
course. If you watch the film is great on its own measurement. But
well,
I will
you know
say,
what? I
watched
watched the non-black and white version, and
Yeah,
I
see?
still recommend it.
You still recommend it.
It's still, although yes, I mean, I sometimes wonder if we've lost our barometer for like what is sensitively capable on people to consume some of these. You know what I mean? Like this is a heavy flick.
A very heavy film.
The deep, especially the deeper you go into it. But you know, if you've stuck with us for 2 months or 2 years, you know kind of what we are about, and I would highly recommend this as a date night movie.
It's a date movie. It's
yeah,
a date movie.
Yeah. Just Into the Mist.
Well, that puts another installment of The Fear of God in the books, another installment of Hashtag 19 in the books. But wait, there's more for a low price. So next week, we're going to be continuing with this sort of abbreviated bunch of Hashtag 19. We're going to be diving back into more Stephen King next week. I'm so excited. I'm going to see if I can leverage this for the whole year. But we're going to be diving into next week. Prepare yourself in one of two ways, or in both ways. Either seek out and read the very brief novella called Cycle of the Werewolf, or seek out the mid-1980s film called Silver Bullet, screenplay by Stephen King, based on the novella by Stephen King. Silver Bullet / Cycle of the Werewolf. That is where we are headed next week. Nathan, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, and thank you, listeners, always you, for listening to us yet again. We'll see you guys next week.
So there really were no. Do you think there were gorillas out in the midst of the movie? Like I know there's like. I mean, do you think
there's at least one?
Maybe
there's
one.
at least one.
Maybe,
but
one.
it's got like the face of like
a mandibled. Oh.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's got a predator face.
Spider
That's
buddy.
It. No. It's like got a predator face. It's predator gorilla.
That sounds wicked. I don't know. I like the safety of the grocery store. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it is not the end of the conversation. You can continue this conversation in a variety of ways. On Twitter, @TheFearOfGod. On Instagram, @FearOfGodPodcast. You can like or follow us on Facebook, or join the Fear of God Facebook discussion group. Follow Reed on Twitter @ReedLackey, and Nathan @TheNathanRouse. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com, or visit morethanonelesson.com to comment on the official episode posts. And lastly, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.